Have you ever felt that something sacred was missing from the story of creation, as if the gods we were taught to worship only told half the truth? What if the other half, the darker half, was never evil at all, just forbidden? The Norse once whispered of deities they dared not name, beings of chaos and shadow who ruled beyond the twilight of Ragnarok. They were called the Rökkar, the forbidden night gods of the north, and their black rites promised something far more dangerous than faith: understanding. You won't find them in your school books or Marvel movies. These weren't heroes. They were the gods of dissolution, the forces that the Aesir themselves feared. Loki, Hel, Fenrir, Jormungandr, their names still hum with the power of forbidden Norse spirituality, the occult wisdom that once shaped entire civilizations and then vanished into snow and silence. But what if those ancient shadows never disappeared? What if they've just been waiting for us to remember? Because maybe enlightenment doesn't come from light alone. Maybe the only way to understand creation is to walk willingly into its darkness. In this journey, we'll uncover the black alchemy of the North, the rituals, the mysteries, and the forgotten Norse cosmology that dared to balance heaven with abyss. What you'll discover here isn't myth, it's initiation. So if you've ever felt drawn to the unknown, if you've ever sensed that truth lives just beyond the edge of fear, this is your path. Welcome to the Rökkar, the forbidden night gods of the North, and their black rites. Subscribe now, join the circle, and awaken the part of you that remembers the darkness. Not as your enemy, but as your oldest teacher. There are whispers older than sunlight, voices that move like smoke through the pine forests of the North. There are gods whispered only in darkness, deities that even the Norse feared to name when the fire burned low. Those who knew of them spoke carefully, almost afraid that sound itself might summon their gaze. These were the Rökkar, the shadow gods of the North, the forbidden side of Norse mythology, hidden behind the bright masks of the Aesir. To most, they were chaos, but to a few, they were the forgotten teachers of balance. The ancients understood something we lost. That darkness was not evil, only unaccepted divinity. The black rites of the North were not curses, but conversations with the void. And in those cold nights, when the aurora danced like serpents, some dared to listen. You can almost picture it, a lone wanderer beneath the northern stars, staring into the fire until his own reflection vanishes. He feels the pulse of the earth, the hum of old power buried under ice. It's in that silence where the forbidden Norse deities begin to speak, not in words, but in intuition, a knowing that crawls up from the marrow. To them, the Rökkar were not devils, but necessary forces in a world born from conflict. Every storm, every winter, every loss, all were expressions of the Norse occultism that hid within nature itself. To fear the dark was to misunderstand life's half, that makes growth possible. And maybe deep down we all sense that calling, the one that asks us to face what we've buried inside. Most people cling to light because it's comfortable. It flatters the ego, gives the illusion of control. But the old mystics of the North, the practitioners of forbidden Norse rituals, saw things differently. They believed the gods of the abyss were not enemies to be conquered, but thresholds to be crossed. To invoke them was to awaken. The Norse mysticism behind their rites wasn't about worshipping shadows, but integrating them. The ancients spoke of Hel, the goddess of death, not with fear, but with respect. They saw Fenrir's rage, Loki's trickery, and Jormungandr's endless coil as lessons written in the fabric of existence, metaphors of transformation, not destruction. In every tale of chaos, there was hidden wisdom waiting to be reclaimed. That's the secret we've forgotten, the idea that the cosmos breathes through duality. The forbidden spirituality of the North taught that the universe itself was born through chaos initiation, a shattering that gave rise to order. The Norse dark gods, the Rökkar, embodied that principle. They weren't against creation, they were its other half. Modern minds struggle with this because we've been trained to see light as good and shadow as bad. But what if the shadow is simply light learning to know itself? What if the path to awakening isn't found in denial, but in descent? Those who dared to explore the Norse underworld, to walk the road into Helheim's mysteries, understood this paradox deeply, awakening through darkness. I once met a man in Iceland who told me he'd meditated for 3 days straight under the winter sky, in total silence. He said that after the second night, he saw what he called the serpent of infinity, slithering through his thoughts, endless, devouring, birthing itself again and again. It reminded him of Jormungandr, the world serpent, the Norse symbol of cycles and dissolution. He claimed it wasn't a hallucination, but an initiation, what he called his personal Ragnarok esoteric interpretation. That vision, he said, taught him that everything he feared losing was never his to begin with. The lesson: when you meet the gods of chaos, they don't destroy you. They destroy your illusion of control. This, perhaps, is why the ancients guarded their knowledge with secrecy. The forbidden cosmology of the North wasn't about blasphemy. It was about understanding the mechanics of divine balance. The initiatory path of the Rökkar wasn't for everyone. It was for those willing to step into the void and see if they could return. Their left-hand path wasn't rebellion, it was responsibility, taking ownership of one's own shadow. The mystic revelation that came through such descent wasn't pretty, but it was true. That's the price of dark enlightenment. You don't get to keep your comforting lies. You trade them for something colder, but infinitely more real, forbidden gnosis. And so the story of the Black Dawn isn't one of damnation, but of remembrance. It's the rediscovery of the gods that were hidden, the forbidden spirituality that pulsed beneath the myths we thought we knew. The Norse chaos gods weren't waiting in the sky. They were waiting inside. And those who hear their call often feel a strange nostalgia, as if remembering a truth from before they were born. But this is only the beginning. For before there were shadows, there was light. And before the Rökkar were exiled, they danced in harmony with the gods of order. To understand how this fracture began, we must go back to when the light itself was young and the cosmos still dared to dream. When the light was young, it didn't yet know it was light. It shimmered in uncertainty, caught between birth and oblivion, still tasting the darkness it came from. The Norse used to say that creation began not with order, but with tension, the clash between fire and ice, Muspelheim and Niflheim. From that cosmic friction came life, and within that life a secret. Everything born from contrast carries both chaos and harmony within it. The forbidden Norse deities, the Rökkar, were not intruders into this world, but co-creators of it. The Aesir represented structure, while the shadow gods of the North embodied dissolution. Together, they danced the rhythm of eternity, creation through destruction, order through decay. But somewhere along the way, humanity got uncomfortable with that rhythm. People started craving permanence, security, rules, and so they rewrote the stories, reshaping gods into saints and shadows into monsters. The Norse dark gods were recast as villains, their names whispered only in secrecy, yet the original Norse cosmology was cyclical, not linear. It didn't fear endings, because every end was a new beginning. That's the hidden wisdom buried beneath centuries of myth. To deny the Rökkar was to deny half of existence, to reject the side of the divine that dissolves so new worlds can rise. What once was sacred became forbidden, and the black alchemy of balance was forgotten. Imagine for a moment if every sunset terrified you because it resembled death. That's how the modern mind reacts to the idea of destruction as sacred. We've lost the Norse mysticism that accepted impermanence as divine law, but the ancient Nordic cults understood. Creation needs chaos, the way lungs need air. The forbidden spirituality of the North didn't ask you to worship the void, it asked you to understand it. They believed that by meditating on cosmic dissolution, one could awaken hidden wisdom, a kind of dark enlightenment that stripped away illusion. The light wasn't afraid of the dark then, it learned from it. And that was the real secret of Norse gnosis, unity through contrast. One of the most profound symbols of this hidden cosmology lies in the story of Ragnarok, often mistranslated as the end of the world. In truth, it means the renewal through the gods' twilight. The Norse chaos gods didn't destroy creation, they reset it. Ragnarok's esoteric interpretation reveals a spiritual process, not an apocalypse. It's what happens when a soul, too burdened by false light, must be broken open to see beyond illusion. Just as the cosmos cycles through destruction, so must consciousness. Every initiation into forbidden gnosis begins with collapse, a death of certainty. That's why the ancient mystics called this the path of the serpent, the shedding of old skin to be reborn into infinity. If you've ever gone through something that shattered your identity, a heartbreak, a loss, an ego collapse, You've lived your own miniature Ragnarok. You've touched the Norse underworld without realizing it. And maybe you came back with scars, but also with eyes that see differently. That's the hidden function of the Rökkar current, to strip away everything false so that only truth remains. In modern spirituality, we often chase light, peace, and manifestation. The old Norse initiates would have laughed softly at that. They sought instead the mystery of the void, that silent power which unites all opposites. They didn't seek comfort, they sought awakening through darkness. The deeper you study this forbidden cosmology, the clearer it becomes that the ancients weren't naive. They understood entropy, death, and decay, but they saw divinity within it. The Norse esoteric knowledge wasn't about escaping life. It was about fully entering it, even the painful parts. That's what the left-hand path truly meant in the North. Not rebellion, but realism. To walk that path was to embrace the gods of the abyss, not as enemies, but as mirrors of one's own potential. Every fall, every mistake, every loss became part of the initiatory path. The Rökkar were never against life. They were life's shadow, teaching that to live fully one must die many times. And yet, even in those ancient days, not everyone accepted this truth. Some feared it, some tried to erase it. The old stories tell of cults that went silent, temples that disappeared under snow, and runes that spoke only to those who dared to read them backward. As light rose, shadow withdrew, but it didn't vanish. It simply went underground, waiting, and those who still sought it had to do so in secret, beneath the aurora's pale glow. They would whisper names like Hel, Loki, and Fenrir, not as curses, but as keys. That's where our journey turns next, into the veil of the vanished cults, where the forbidden rites of the North were carried out beneath the endless night. They say the snow remembers. Beneath the frost and stone of forgotten Scandinavia lie traces of the cults that once dared to speak to the shadow gods of the North. These ancient worshippers didn't gather in temples or carve grand idols. Their altars were the frozen earth, their prayers carried by the northern wind. Under the dancing auroras, they practiced forbidden Norse rituals meant to bridge the realms of the living and the unseen. To them, the Rökkar weren't monsters but mentors, emissaries of Norse mysticism who guided seekers into the underworld of the self. The black rites of the North weren't about summoning demons, they were about summoning courage, the strength to face the darkness within and without. Archaeologists have found curious things in the Northlands, fragments of runes etched on bone, charred symbols drawn in ash, and strange ceremonial objects buried far from settlements. They speak perhaps mass of secret initiations, moments when followers of these ancient Nordic cults sought to awaken forbidden gnosis. Some scholars dismiss them as remnants of superstition, but those who have walked the path of esoteric mythology feel otherwise. Each rune, each relic whispers a truth that modern minds overlook, that the Norse occultism of old wasn't merely religion, it was a technology of transformation. It was black alchemy for the soul, a dialogue with the gods of the abyss, where the self was dissolved and reforged. There are old folk tales still told in rural Norway of wanderers who vanished under the aurora and returned years later, speaking in riddles, their eyes glimmering with what villagers called Hel's reflection. They were believed to have entered Helheim's mysteries, to have spoken with Hel herself, the goddess of death and rebirth. These stories may sound like legend, but they mirror something real, the experience of ego death, the descent into spiritual darkness that precedes awakening. The forbidden Norse deities were never meant to be feared. They were initiators of metamorphosis. Through them, the ancients learned that life and death weren't opposites, but continuous states of being, intertwined like Fenrir's chains of illusion. Imagine the night of such a rite, the aurora stretching across the sky like a green flame, the snow glowing faintly in its reflection. A circle of initiates stands barefoot on the frozen ground, their breath rising like ghosts. They chant the names of the hidden gods, Loki, Hel, Jormungandr, calling not for favor but for revelation. In that moment, the boundary between worlds thins. The forbidden spirituality of the North awakens. The serpent of infinity coils around their consciousness. What they seek isn't power over others, it's power over fear. They long to understand the Norse underworld, not as punishment, but as the inner sanctum of rebirth. This was chaos initiation, the soul's dialogue with cosmic dissolution. It's strange how much of this survived in disguise. Old lullabies about wolves devouring the sun, fairy tales where the trickster wins through loss, even Christianized saints who carry the scent of older gods, all remnants of forbidden Norse cosmology, veiled in myth. The shadow gods of the north didn't die. They adapted, slipping into folk stories and dreams. Some modern shamans still feel their presence in DMT visions, serpents of light, whispering from the void, teaching the mystery of the void itself. The gods of the abyss never vanished. They simply changed form, waiting for those who could recognize them behind the mask of myth. Hidden wisdom, after all, doesn't die. It hides in plain sight. I remember once hearing a Sami elder speak about the night drum, an ancient shamanic tool. He said when the drum beats at a certain rhythm under the aurora, it opens a doorway, a bridge between the worlds. We don't summon gods, he said. We remember them. That struck me deeply. Maybe the forbidden Norse deities were never exiled. Maybe we just forgot their language. The Norse esoteric knowledge wasn't lost. It's encoded in nature itself, in the hum of glaciers, in the howl of wolves, in the silence between storms. The initiatory path of the Rökkar lives on wherever people dare to listen to what the darkness says when no one else will. And so, the veil remains, thin, shimmering, and patient. Those who walk this path know it's not for curiosity or thrill, but for transformation. Every whisper from the forbidden pantheon carries both danger and enlightenment. The ancient Nordic cults may have faded into history, but the current they touched still flows beneath the world's surface. And among those shadowed currents moves a name, one God who broke every law, crossed every line, and in doing so revealed the hidden nature of divinity itself. His fire was chaos and wisdom intertwined, and soon we'll have to speak of him. The trickster, the teacher, the flame that never dies. Loki. They called him a liar, a betrayer, a serpent in the hall of the gods. But the truth, the real, esoteric truth, is far more complex. Loki, the trickster of the north, was never just chaos for chaos's sake. He was the forbidden teacher, the flame that burned through illusion. Those who understood the black rites of the north saw him not as evil, but as the initiator of forbidden gnosis. He was the shadow mirror of Odin. While Odin sought wisdom through sacrifice, Loki taught it through transgression. The Norse dark gods had many faces, but Loki's was the one that smiled while breaking the rules of creation. And in that smile lay a secret. Sometimes, divinity hides in what we are told to reject. Think about it. Every myth that endures hides a spiritual code. Loki's was rebellion as revelation. His chaos was sacred disobedience, the kind that exposes false order. The forbidden Norse deities were never tame, and neither was awakening. Loki's occult meaning is often misunderstood because people confuse comfort with truth. In Norse mysticism, his role wasn't to destroy for pleasure, but to strip away illusions that kept the cosmos asleep. When he set the gods against one another, he was forcing them to see their hypocrisy. When he birthed monsters like Fenrir and Jormungandr, he wasn't birthing evil, he was birthing balance. To know Loki is to know the shadow side of wisdom, and to risk being burned by it. I once heard an Icelandic mystic describe Loki as the spark between yes and no. That spark, he said, is what makes creation alive. Without it, everything stagnates. The initiatory path of the Rökkar begins with this spark, the moment you question what you've been told to fear. Loki represents that impulse, the voice in the dark that asks, what if the forbidden is sacred? The ancient Nordic cults saw this as the first step toward awakening through darkness. To break the chain of blind obedience was to touch the serpent of infinity, the eternal current of change. Every transformation, whether alchemical or spiritual, begins with that same defiance. Loki's gift was not destruction, it was motion, and yet motion comes at a price. In every myth, Loki pays for his fire. Bound beneath the earth, venom dripping upon his face, he endures endless torment, the archetype of divine consequence. But those who read deeper see an esoteric transformation taking place. His suffering isn't punishment, it's black alchemy. It's the same crucible every seeker enters when they confront the gods of the abyss. To transgress spiritually is to dissolve the ego, to face the shadow of God and survive. That's why Loki's descent mirrors the inner descent of every initiate. You fall, you break, and through that cosmic dissolution, you remember what you really are, something far beyond good or evil. In modern life, Loki's lessons are everywhere, though few recognize them. Every time someone leaves a stagnant relationship, abandons a soulless career, or challenges a corrupt belief system, they're walking Loki's path. The forbidden spirituality of the North isn't ancient history. It's a living current that flows through acts of courage and authenticity. The left-hand path he represents isn't about defying morality, but about transcending limitation. The chaos initiation of Loki teaches that order without truth is rot, and sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to break it open. It's uncomfortable, yes, but no real enlightenment comes without fire. Some initiates of the Rökkar cults believed Loki's binding was symbolic, that he allowed himself to be restrained so others could learn to break their own chains. His venomous ordeal reflected the human condition, poisoned by fear, paralyzed by conformity, yet his endurance whispered a secret. Even bound, the flame remains. The occult philosophy behind Loki's myth teaches that freedom is internal. No chain can touch it. The gods of the abyss may test you, but they cannot claim you unless you surrender. That's the paradox of the shadow gods of the North. They enslave only those who refuse to face them. To confront them consciously is to become untouchable. So the story of Loki isn't just myth, it's an instruction. It's an initiatory path disguised as legend, a blueprint for rebellion that leads to spiritual rebirth. He reminds us that the forbidden is often the unexamined truth, and that the serpent's tongue sometimes speaks wisdom wrapped in flame. But his path isn't walked alone, for in every descent there must be a counterpart, a stillness to balance the storm, a silence that answers the flame. To find that balance, we must journey deeper, into the realm of his daughter, the Queen of Stillness, the keeper of the Norse underworld. Her name is Hel, and in her darkness, the soul learns how to rest before it can rise. Hel does not shout. She does not demand worship or thunder across the skies like Odin or Thor. Her power is silent, the kind that waits beneath everything that lives. To the ancients who practiced the black rites of the North, she was not a villain but the most honest of the Norse dark gods. They called her the still mirror of the cosmos, the goddess who revealed truth through stillness. The forbidden Norse deities each carried a lesson, and hers was the hardest, to release. In her realm, Helheim, all illusions end. Status, pride, even hope. Yet what she offers is not despair, but rest. The Norse mysticism surrounding her speaks of peace within dissolution, the quiet heartbeat beneath the world's noise. Those who feared hell misunderstood her. The later mythographers, eager to turn chaos into sin, painted her as monstrous, half dead, half alive, a symbol of decay. But the forbidden cosmology of the North saw her differently. Hel's form reflected the human soul, one side radiant, the other shadowed, both divine. She ruled not punishment, but balance. To walk into her realm was to confront one's own duality. That's why ancient Nordic cults whispered her name during rites of darkness meditation, seeking union with the void. They called this practice the stilling of the storm, and those who succeeded returned with eyes that saw beyond fear, what some later mystics called awakening through darkness. I once met a Norwegian hermit who claimed he'd spent a winter in total silence, following what he called hell's discipline. He meditated in the snow, spoke to no one, and listened only to the wind. At first, he told me, the silence was torture. Then it became music. He said he'd glimpsed the Norse underworld not as a place of death, but as an inner state. The moment the mind stops resisting reality, that's the mystery of the void. When you surrender to it, it no longer consumes you. The forbidden spirituality of Helheim isn't about endings, it's about purification. Through her stillness, you learn that the self you cling to is the true illusion. That realization is dark enlightenment. In esoteric mythology, Hel represents the descent of awareness into matter, the spirit's decision to fully experience form, even pain. She is the womb and the tomb, the black alchemy of transformation. The old initiates of the Rökkar cults believed her embrace dissolved the ego like snow in fire. To them, she was the guardian of forbidden gnosis, the one who taught through silence rather than speech. Her devotees practiced sensory deprivation. sitting in caves or cold lakes until hallucinations gave way to visions. Modern science calls it isolation. The ancients called it communion. Through shamanic darkness, they touched the gods of the abyss and returned transformed, carrying hell's calm within their chaos. Hell's domain is not absence but fullness, a fullness too vast for the human mind to grasp. That's why she's feared. When the soul glimpses her realm, it sees reality stripped bare, free of stories. There is no reward or punishment there, only truth. This is the hidden wisdom of the Norse occultism. The gods of the abyss are not moral forces, but metaphysical teachers. Hell's stillness dismantles false light, preparing the seeker for the next revelation. The mystery of the void becomes the teacher itself. To rest in her darkness is to prepare for rebirth, to let the serpent of infinity coil once more and renew creation from the inside out. Those who truly understand hell realize she is the quiet counterpart to Odin's frenzy and Loki's fire. Where they move outward in search of meaning, she draws inward toward essence. The forbidden Norse rituals devoted to her often involved lying motionless beneath the stars, surrendering completely, a symbolic death. This wasn't nihilism, it was the initiatory path of becoming one with the still center of existence. Hell's wisdom teaches that peace isn't found in avoidance, but in full acceptance of the shadow. Only when you stop fighting the darkness do you realize it's not an enemy at all. It's the part of God that dreams. Her silence whispers, "Be still and know." And yet there is one who could never be still, one who embodies the bound will, the restrained power of chaos. He was the child of both fire and shadow, a creature chained by the fear of the gods themselves. If hell teaches release, he teaches resistance. The ancients called him Fenrir, the wolf of destiny, a living metaphor for the spirit that refuses to be contained. And if you listen closely, you can still hear his growl echoing through the ages, reminding us that awakening sometimes demands a fight. For to break free from illusion, one must first face the chains that bind the soul. The howl of Fenrir is not just a sound, it's a memory. It echoes from the marrow of creation itself, that primal cry of the bound will longing to break free. In the lore of the Norse dark gods, Fenrir was the wolf of destiny, the forbidden son of chaos who terrified even the gods of order. But the ancients who practiced the black rites of the North knew better. They saw him not as a monster, but as the reflection of humanity's own fear of power. The Norse mysticism surrounding Fenrir reveals him as the guardian of transformation, the embodiment of the untamed soul. The forbidden Norse deities often mirrored aspects of the human psyche, and Fenrir's was the most dangerous, the will to awaken, no matter the cost. They say the gods bound him with Gleipnir, a chain woven from 6 impossible things: the sound of a cat's footsteps, the roots of a mountain, the beard of a woman, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird, and the sinews of a bear. Impossible, intangible, unreal. And that's the hidden message. Consciousness itself is bound by illusions. The ancient Nordic cults taught that Gleipnir was symbolic, representing the lies we tell ourselves to feel safe. Each illusion, fear, ego, comfort, control, denial, attachment, weaves itself around our spirit until movement becomes impossible. To break those bonds, one must enter chaos initiation, facing the forbidden Norse deities within, those shadow gods of the North who tear away what isn't real. Fenrir's symbolism goes far beyond a mere wolf. He is the raw potential of life unrestrained, the power that terrifies those addicted to order. The Norse occultism of the Rökkar path reveals him as both destroyer and liberator, the spiritual force that devours illusion. The esoteric mythology teaches that every person carries their own Gleipnir. It's the voice that says, don't change, don't risk, don't see. The left-hand path of awakening demands we do the opposite. We must invite the storm, unchain the wolf, and walk willingly into uncertainty. For Fenrir's breaking free at Ragnarok isn't the end of the world. It's the soul's revolt against falsehood, the moment of dark enlightenment when freedom outweighs fear. I once met a man in Sweden who said he faced his Fenrir during a near-death experience. He told me it wasn't a creature he saw. It was his own reflection, eyes wild with anger, roaring to live. I realized I'd spent my whole life chained to the fear of disappointing others, he said. And in that moment, I snapped. He called it his black alchemy, the point where everything that held him back burned away, That's the essence of the forbidden spirituality of the North, transformation through confrontation. The gods of the abyss don't ask you to worship them, they ask you to become them, to look at your chaos and say, yes, that's mine, and it's sacred. The Norse gnosis hidden in Fenrir's story teaches that breaking chains is never comfortable. The process of esoteric transformation shatters what you thought you were. People often crave freedom but resist change. They want the wolf without the teeth. Yet true liberation always comes with destruction. The forbidden Norse deities embody this paradox perfectly. Fenrir doesn't politely ask for space, he devours what imprisons him. The Black Dawn of Awakening isn't peaceful, it's violent in its honesty. But from that metaphysical darkness, a new awareness emerges. It's not the chaos of ruin, but the chaos of rebirth. The serpent of infinity coils once more, and life begins again. In many ways, Fenrir's breaking of his chains mirrors the human journey toward forbidden gnosis. Every awakening requires a death, not of the body, but of certainty. The ancient practitioners of Norse mysticism saw the wolf's fury as a sacred force that clears away deception. Modern seekers might find that energy in intense meditation, in psychedelic revelations, or in the raw honesty of admitting their deepest truth. The shadow gods of the North whisper the same lesson through every medium. What you suppress becomes what controls you. To set yourself free, you must stop pretending. The wolf doesn't hide, he howls. And yet, Fenrir's rage is only one part of the story. His strength alone would destroy everything if not balanced by wisdom. That balance comes from his brother, the serpent who encircles the world, Jörmungandr. If Fenrir represents breaking free, Jörmungandr represents dissolving entirely. One destroys illusion, the other reveals infinity. Together they embody the forbidden Norse cosmology of death and rebirth, of order collapsing into void and returning as something new. So as Fenrir snaps his chains, the serpent begins to stir beneath the world, coiling in preparation for the final revelation, the one that blurs the line between self and eternity. Beneath the frozen soil and the silent seas, something ancient coils in the dark. The Norse called it Jörmungandr, the serpent that encircles the world, the son of Loki and sibling to Hel and Fenrir. To the uninitiated, it's a monster of apocalypse. To the keepers of Norse mysticism, it's the serpent of infinity, the circle of life that devours itself to stay whole. The forbidden Norse deities weren't separate beings, but mirrors of cosmic principles, and Jörmungandr embodied the law of eternal return. In the black rites of the North, initiates would meditate on his endless body, visualizing the Ouroboros swallowing its tail, the ultimate symbol of forbidden gnosis, of creation sustained by its own dissolution. Those who walked the Rökkar path believed that Jörmungandr wasn't simply myth, it was consciousness itself. The serpent represented the infinite recursion of awareness, the realization that everything seen is both observer and observed. The Norse occultism behind this imagery hints at a terrifying freedom. There is no outside. The serpent's coil is the cosmos, and we all live inside its curve. Ancient Nordic cults used rhythmic breathing, chanting, or even entheogenic rituals. What modern seekers might compare to DMT visions, to see through the coil. In those states, the serpent revealed itself as pure energy, neither good nor evil, but eternally shifting, the shadow of God and the light intertwined. I once spoke to a modern shaman who described a vision that matched this ancient description almost perfectly. He said he was deep in trance when he felt himself dissolve into a spinning circle of light and darkness, endlessly looping. It wasn't a being, he said, it was the pulse of existence. That's what the Old Norse mystics meant by Jörmungandr's awakening, the moment the self realizes it's both the world and the serpent that encircles it. The Norse esoteric knowledge hidden in this myth wasn't about fear of the end. It was about embracing the eternal cycle. To face the serpent was to confront the mystery of the void, and to find calm in its infinite motion. Every culture has its serpent. Egypt had Apep, India had Ananta, the Gnostics had the dragon of the abyss. But in Norse mysticism, Jörmungandr carries a unique message. He reminds us that endings are illusions. The forbidden cosmology of the North teaches that Ragnarok is not destruction, but renewal, the black dawn before rebirth. The serpent represents the metaphysical darkness that both devours and creates. To meditate upon it is to experience dark enlightenment, the peace that comes when you stop resisting change. The Norse dark gods didn't promise salvation, they promised truth, and truth, as the ancients knew, is both radiant and terrifying. In the initiatory path of the Rökkar, the serpent's vision was considered the final trial. Few could face it and return sane. The shamanic darkness of the rite stripped away every boundary between self and cosmos, life and death, God and void. The serpent whispered forbidden wisdom, that the universe is dreaming itself, and we are its dreamers. This forbidden spirituality was not metaphor, it was direct experience. The initiates called it the mystery of the void. And when they came back, their eyes carried the reflection of infinity, a gaze that saw through illusion, through time itself. To survive such knowledge was to be remade. Modern seekers still touch this serpent, though they may not recognize it. Some glimpse it during near-death experiences, others through deep meditation or altered states of consciousness. It appears as spirals, fractals, waves, the visual language of infinity. Science might call it geometry, the ancients called it revelation. The hidden gods of the north taught that to know Jörmungandr is to know your own dissolution. That's why forbidden gnosis always walks the edge of madness, because to see beyond the veil is to see the self vanish. And yet, paradoxically, that vanishing brings peace. The serpent doesn't destroy, it liberates. And so, as Jörmungandr stirs beneath the world, the circle nears completion. The serpent is the silence after Fenrir's howl, the stillness after Hell's embrace. It is the forbidden Norse deity that unites them all. The endless coil where every god, every shadow, every spark returns to source. The old cults knew this and honored it with reverence, chanting beneath eclipses until they vanished into trance. For the serpent is not outside us, it is the pulse within. And those who dared to follow it deeper found themselves standing at the threshold of something greater. The forbidden ceremonies where the black alchemy of existence was performed, the secret rituals of the Rökkar themselves. They say there are ceremonies that should never be spoken of in daylight, rituals older than kings, older even than Odin's laws. The black rites of the Rökkar belong to that secret current, the forbidden Norse rituals whispered only under eclipses and auroras. To the uninitiated, they sound like madness, blood in the snow, chanting to the gods of the abyss, staring into darkness until the self dissolves. But to those who understood the Norse mysticism behind it, these rites weren't evil, they were initiatory. The forbidden Norse deities demanded not worship, but experience, direct communion with the shadow side of creation. The black alchemy of the north was a science of the soul, transforming fear into revelation. Picture a frozen field beneath an aurora that burns like green fire. The initiates kneel in silence, cloaked in furs, faces hidden by soot. A low hum begins, vibrating through the ice, calling upon the forbidden Norse pantheon, Loki, Hel, Fenrir, Jörmungandr. Their chant isn't supplication, it's synchronization. The Norse dark gods were not summoned to control reality but to merge with it. The practitioners sought chaos initiation, to awaken through dissolution. It was said that, during the ritual, the boundaries of body and mind would blur until only the serpent of infinity remained. That was the goal of forbidden gnosis, to become the void itself and survive it. Historical fragments hint at what happened in those ceremonies. Ancient Nordic cults left behind symbols carved in bone, spirals, wolves, serpents devouring themselves. Some inscriptions translate roughly to, "I have seen through the coil," or "the night revealed me." These weren't metaphors, they were testimonies of transformation. The forbidden spirituality of the North was experiential, not dogmatic. It wasn't about believing in the shadow gods of the North. It was about becoming them, embodying the forces of dissolution and rebirth. This was the essence of Norse occultism, awakening through darkness, forging light from chaos, embracing the hidden wisdom buried within the void. Modern scholars often dismiss such practices as primitive shamanism, but that's a misunderstanding. These rites were metaphysical experiments, ways of accessing Norse esoteric knowledge through altered states. The practitioners used breathwork, rhythmic drumming, and sensory deprivation to dissolve the ego. Some even mixed blood with snow, symbolizing union with the land and its ancient spirits. The black alchemy wasn't literal. It was symbolic of integration, merging opposites into wholeness. The initiates believed that through such acts, they contacted the gods of the abyss, those forbidden Norse deities that existed beyond the duality of good and evil. Their goal was not escape, but expansion. But every initiation carries risk. The forbidden Norse rituals weren't gentle. They stripped the soul bare. Many who entered didn't return whole. The ancient texts speak of wanderers who lost their minds, their sense of time, even their names. The Norse mysticism behind these rites warned that the ego cannot survive full exposure to the void. That's why the Rökkar were called the shadow gods of awakening. They destroy only to rebuild. The spiritual darkness they offered was both purifying and perilous. To face them was to face the metaphysical darkness of one's own being. And yet, those who endured were said to emerge luminous, their hearts burning with forbidden enlightenment. I once read an old Icelandic account of a man who attempted one of these rituals alone. He built a circle of stones under the aurora and invoked the Rökkar by name. He claimed the air grew thick, the stars folded inward, and he saw hell's eyes open in the sky. "She showed me my death," he wrote, "and then I woke as if I had never been alive before." Whether that story is myth or memory doesn't matter. Its lesson does. The gods of the abyss don't appear to punish, they appear to awaken. The mystery of the void isn't annihilation but realization, the understanding that even the dark is divine. And now, perhaps, these black rites are no longer hidden. In an age of global disconnection and spiritual confusion, people are unconsciously reenacting them, meditating in darkness, seeking ego death, flirting with chaos in art and thought. Humanity is calling the Rökkar again, summoning the forbidden Norse deities without realizing it. The serpent of infinity coils once more beneath our feet. The night gods stir, answering the call of a collapsing world. For the cycle always returns, and as the black rites awaken once again, so too do the shadow gods who guide them. Their return is not prophecy, it is recognition. The darkness we summon is our own. It begins quietly, not with thunder, but with exhaustion. A world burning out beneath neon lights, souls starving in the noise of endless connection, and beneath that exhaustion, something ancient stirs. The Rökkar, the Norse dark gods, the shadow forces once buried beneath myth, are waking again, not as beings of flesh or fire, but as currents moving through the collective psyche. The forbidden Norse deities never died. They retreated into the subconscious, waiting for the moment when humanity would need them once more. That moment is now. The signs are everywhere: chaos, disillusionment, collapse. The gods of the abyss are whispering again, and whether we know it or not, we are listening. You can see their fingerprints in the modern world if you know how to look. The obsession with apocalypse, the fascination with destruction, the hunger for forbidden knowledge, all echoes of the ancient Norse mysticism returning through us. The shadow gods of the north always reappear during transitions, when civilizations forget their balance. Humanity has become like the Aesir before Ragnarok, proud, detached, worshipping order while denying the necessity of chaos. But the forbidden cosmology of the north teaches that creation renews itself only through dissolution. The world isn't ending, it's molting. The serpent of infinity is shedding its skin. What we call crisis, the ancients called initiation. The digital age has become our new Helheim, a place of endless mirrors, where souls float without weight. People scroll, consume, and forget, trapped in a cycle that devours meaning. This is spiritual Fenrir, the bound will of humanity, chained by algorithms and distraction. Yet within this prison, the Norse mysticism still flickers. More people are seeking silence, meditation, darkness retreats, modern reflections of the black rites of the north. The forbidden spirituality of the Rökkar is resurfacing through those who reject artificial light and crave something real, raw, and ancient. The Norse chaos gods have changed shape, but their message remains: only through darkness can you remember the light. Artists, thinkers, and mystics are channeling this forbidden current without even knowing its name. The rise of shadow work, the fascination with the void, the rebirth of occult philosophy. These are modern expressions of the Norse esoteric knowledge once guarded by ancient Nordic cults. When people confront their fears, they are invoking hell. When they destroy false identities, they awaken Fenrir. When they dissolve the ego in transcendence, they meet Jörmungandr. This is the hidden wisdom of the North re-emerging, the realization that enlightenment isn't about escaping darkness, but embracing it. The forbidden gnosis of the Rökkar lives on in every soul that dares to evolve through chaos. I once spoke with a woman who said she began seeing serpents in her dreams after a long depression. She thought it was madness, until she started studying Norse mythology secrets and discovered Jörmungandr's symbolism. The serpent wasn't trying to kill me, she said. It was trying to wake me up. That's the paradox of the shadow gods. They destroy illusions, not lives. The forbidden Norse deities are returning not to punish, but to restore balance. They rise through our crises, whispering through anxiety, loss, and rebellion. The black alchemy of the North continues to work within us, dissolving old structures so that new ones can emerge from the ashes. Every age of collapse is also an age of awakening. The Rökkar's resurgence mirrors the primordial chaos before creation, not an ending, but a reset. As society's illusions unravel, the forbidden Norse rituals reappear symbolically in our actions, revolutions, spiritual awakenings, creative chaos. Humanity stands once more between order and abyss, just as the gods once did. This is the eternal cycle of Ragnarok's esoteric interpretation: death and rebirth, shadow and flame, collapse and renewal. The night gods are not returning from elsewhere. They are emerging from within us. The Norse occultism that once hid in caves now hums through circuits and hearts alike. And yet, even this awakening is not the destination, only a threshold. The forbidden spirituality of the North was never about worshipping gods, but understanding them as mirrors. The hidden gods return so we may remember what they reflect, the infinite potential within the human soul. The Rökkar don't demand faith, they demand recognition. Their call is both terrifying and liberating, a reminder that darkness is not the enemy, but the teacher. And for those who can listen, who can stand still in the storm, there is one final lesson waiting. Beyond the noise, beyond the chaos, there is a gate, the night gate, where shadow and light dissolve into one. And so the storm quiets, the chaos subsides, leaving only silence, a silence that feels alive, almost listening. This is the moment the ancients called the night gate, the threshold between endings and beginnings. Here, the Rökkar stand not as monsters, but as mirrors, the shadow gods of the North, keepers of forbidden Norse wisdom. They are the last test and the first truth. The forbidden Norse deities no longer appear in fire and thunder, but in the calm acceptance of what is. When one reaches this point, there are no more prayers, no more rituals, only presence. To walk through the night gate is to become both the seeker and the sought, the question and the answer. The Norse mysticism of this gate teaches that the final initiation is not an act of power, but of surrender. The black alchemy that once tore you apart now becomes peace. The forbidden spirituality of the North leads here to the understanding that shadow and light were never enemies. The Norse dark gods are not waiting in the void. They are the void, and so are you. The hidden gods, the forbidden Norse deities, the chaos that once frightened you, all dissolve into a single awareness. The serpent of infinity closes its circle. The gods of the abyss fade into silence, and in that silence you hear your own heartbeat, steady, ancient, eternal. Many initiates described this moment as a strange stillness, where thought collapses into knowing. They said it feels like standing in the center of Ragnarok itself, not destruction but revelation. The forbidden Norse rituals, the black rites of the North, the chaos initiation, all of it leads to this understanding. The end was never outside. It was always within. The Norse esoteric knowledge calls it the awakening through darkness. Modern mystics might call it integration. Whatever the name, it's the same experience in realizing that the gods, the world, and the self are made of the same dream. The forbidden gnosis is simply this: you were never separate. In one of the oldest fragments of Norse occultism, there's a single line: he who dares the void becomes the void. It's not a warning, it's a promise. The forbidden Norse cosmology doesn't end in despair, but in unity. To face the shadow gods of the North is to face the truth of creation itself. That divinity hides in contradiction. Hell's stillness, Loki's fire, Fenrir's rage, Jörmungandr's infinity, all were chapters in a single story, the evolution of consciousness. This is what the ancient Nordic cults understood. The gods were never external rulers. They were states of being, fragments of forbidden gnosis reflected through human experience. Once, I asked an elder mystic, what happens after the night gate? He smiled and said, you stop searching. At first, I thought it meant apathy, but I understand now. It means arrival. The black alchemy has done its work. The left-hand path becomes a circle, and even the forbidden becomes sacred again. The Norse mysticism that began in fear ends in freedom. Through spiritual darkness, you find light. Through dissolution, you find eternity. The gods of the abyss are still here, of course, but they no longer need names. They have become the rhythm of existence itself, pulsing quietly in every breath, every thought, every heartbeat of the cosmos. This is why the Rökkar were called the forbidden night gods of the north, not because they were evil, but because they revealed too much. Their black rites were never about worshipping shadows. They were about becoming whole. To understand them is to see that the shadow of God is not a curse, but a reflection. The forbidden spirituality of the North was always about reconciliation, not escape, but embodiment. When you reach this understanding, the serpent of infinity becomes still. The mystery of the void becomes love. The darkness you once feared reveals itself as the birthplace of light. And there, finally, the journey ends and begins again. To face the Rökkar, the old texts say, is to face the part of God that dreams in darkness. Maybe that's the true essence of Norse mysticism, the courage to look at what creation hides. The forbidden Norse deities teach us that enlightenment isn't blinding brightness, but luminous shadow. The night gods never left. They are the breath between thoughts, the silence beneath the storm. And as we step through the night gate, we realize what the ancients always knew. The void is not empty. It is full of memory, of potential, of endless becoming. The gods of the abyss don't destroy. They remind us who we are. So now that you've walked through the darkness, what will you do with what you've seen? The forbidden wisdom of the North isn't just myth, it's a mirror. Every time you face your fear, every time you let an old version of yourself die, you're performing your own black rite. The Rökkar don't live in temples anymore. They live in choices, the moments you decide between illusion and truth, comfort and freedom. Ask yourself, how often have you run from your shadow when it was actually your teacher? How many times have you chained your own Fenrir, silenced your own Loki, denied your own hell? Maybe that's the challenge the gods of the abyss left for us, to reclaim the divinity hidden in our flaws, the strength found only in surrender, because awakening through darkness isn't about conquering anything, it's about remembering who you really are. You've now seen the forbidden side of Norse cosmology, the black alchemy that turns fear into knowledge, chaos into clarity. The question is, will you keep this truth buried, or will you live it? Will you dare to walk your own initiatory path, to see what waits beyond the night gate within yourself? If this journey has stirred something in you, that quiet, ancient curiosity, don't let it fade. Keep walking. Keep seeking. There are still hidden gods to uncover, still mysteries of the void waiting to reveal themselves. And here, that's exactly what we do. So before you leave, subscribe to the channel, activate the notifications, and join this circle of seekers. Together, we'll keep unearthing the forgotten wisdom of the North, one shadow, one revelation at a time. Because the night isn't your enemy, it's your beginning.